This is the Free Zone Communique, transmitting from Virginia's unoccupied sector. If you think smart cities, DEI, censorship, government intrusion, bug paste, and other left-wing nonsense are no longer a possibility, think again. We've won one election with slim majorities. Our work to rebuild a free and sane America has just begun.
This is the Free Zone Communique on the P4B. Welcome. Very special day today. I got my autographed copy of Vietnam Combat by Robin Bartlett. He was on the show a long time ago, right after he wrote the book. And he was a great guest. He was an excellent guest. As you can see, he got the silver medal from the Military Writers Society of America. He's got great blurbs. Barry McCaffrey, Craig Scruggs, H.R. McMaster. These are heavy hitters. They took the time to read the book, and they have praised the book in some detail. McMaster says, Bartlett's superb memoir gives readers an understanding of the human dimension of the Vietnam War and the profound and sometimes searing experiences of American soldiers who fought it. This is a good book. This should be in your library. I've been recommending it for a long time. I gave it 5 stars, I think, in my review. I highly recommend it. There's going to be a ton of links below the video line this week, and this is one of them. I'll start with this. So, Robin, thank you very, very much for the book. I really enjoyed having you. Maybe it'll be time sometime pretty soon for a revisit, talk about how the book is doing, how you're doing. Also, for my local bubbles, this is something I just thought I would bring up because I had a nice experience yesterday. If you live in the King George and surrounding area and you need a haircut, you might want to get down to Great Cuts in Dahlgren. I think it's Potomac Avenue, the intersection of Potomac Avenue and the road to Dahlgren. I will leave the address and everything else that you need to know, phone number and all that in the text below the video line. Also, if you're a stylist, you might want to keep an eye on this place. They're new, they got to grow, but there's chairs to be had. You may want to contact them and see when they intend to expand, because I think she's capable of taking business away from the big clunky chains. My last 2 haircuts prior to yesterday were a disaster. I told the lady cutting my hair very specifically what I wanted, and it was nowhere close. The previous lady who cut my hair was saying, what do you think I should use, a 2 or a 3? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not the haircut guy. You know, she goes, should I use scissors or shears? I said, I don't know. I just said, just do this, leave real full up here, As a matter of fact, this haircut, I only got to neaten up the sides. My hair was much longer prior to the previous haircut. And I told her I wanted to leave a lot up front. I wanted it combable. And she gave me a high and tight. So that's why I ended up at Great Cuts, and that's why I recommend Great Cuts now. She's also a super nice lady. So if you need a haircut and you live in the area, King George, Dahlgren, that area, get on down there. Yesterday, I had an interesting experience, and we're going to expound on this with today's guest, who, by the way, is a killer guest. I listened to Niall Ferguson give a lecture, Are We the Soviets Now? And I've said more than once that we may not be worse than the Soviets, but we damn sure in a lot of areas, we're no better. We have been expanding toward Russia for 30 years, almost exactly. We told them in 1990, in order to quell the fears of Gorbachev and then Yeltsin, the watchword was not 1 foot eastward, meaning as the Soviets pulled out of Eastern Europe, we would not move in. And on day one, that's exactly what we started to do. By 94, we were guaranteeing NATO guarantees of security for Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. And of course, today we dominate. NATO controls almost the entire European continent up to Russia. Very few exceptions. 30 years ago today, Henry Kissinger was on PBS News Hour, the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour, I think it was called at the time. He was rationalizing this NATO march to the east, taking over one country after another. I'll leave a link to that too. You can judge for yourself whether or not Henry Kissinger is full of shit. He usually was, but he was a very intellectual bullshitter. So he could be very convincing when he wanted to be. But I think it was pure rationalization, trying to justify upsetting the Russians the way we obviously were by moving east, by taking over more and more of Europe, which, although no matter what I say, the crybabies are going to freak out about this. It's not that the Ukraine war wasn't Putin's fault. It was. It could have very easily been stopped before it happened if Biden's handlers, the cabal, had actually imposed real sanctions ahead of time on Russia. They didn't even try. Putin could not believe his good luck as he slowly brought things up to the border, and we didn't do anything, and we didn't do anything, and we did this, and we telegraphed every sanction we were going to put on him. And he figured out, okay, I can work around that, so I'm just going to go ahead and attack. So that's why he ended up there. It was his idea. It was his fault. It was his doing. He was being the aggressor. But we sure as hell beforehand contributed to any angst he might have. We took away his strategic barrier that in his mind and in the minds of a lot of normal, balanced military people in Russia believe they need this barrier. They need land that they can use to protect their borders. And that's what he was after. That's what we denied. We still could have prevented Ukraine, and we didn't. Are we the Soviets? The question goes a lot further, and I will cover all of that with the next guest. Okay, joining us now is a huge guest. I call it a great get for the P4B. He's the author of Preserving Liberty, Bold and Brave Solutions to Save America and Create Permanent Liberty. I had you on speaker view. There it is. There it is.
There we go.
Solutions to Save and Create Permanent Liberty. Now,
Permanent freedom.
I don't know who this guy thinks he is. With that title, I think he thinks he's the P4B, but we'll get to that. He's also the host of the Josh Bernstein Uncensored, or JBU podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome Josh Bernstein to the show. Josh, I understand you're speaking tonight. Where are you going to be?
I am.
Speaking?
Yeah, I'll be speaking in West Phoenix, a town called Sun City West, as a matter of fact, with a buddy of mine, Shane Krauser, who runs an organization in here in Arizona on limiting government, teaching people how to use their own power rather than rely on the government to solve our problems and things like that. So kind of a kindred spirit, and I'll be signing books and doing a little speech at the end. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think you'll find if you peruse the P4B, there is like zero light between us on those issues.
That's okay.
But you sound like a man busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. So
Well,
I'll
I always
jump
like to
right
say
to it.
I'm busier than Rachel Levine trying to tuck his junk into a prom dress. That's about where I'm at.
Which, which is good. If you're flogging a book, that's a good problem to have, you know? Um, yeah, we have messed up virtually all or very near all aspects of our society. I blame that on moral, physical, and intellectual sloth. We have cronies buying up political whores wholesale. Teachers and school districts have overstepped their mandate wildly. And the emotional and perpetually offended and the weak seem to dominate every conversation. Do I exaggerate our situation today?
No, look, I think what's happened in America in the last 4 years has been tyranny by the minority. I think that's what it's really been. I don't think the majority of people support the Biden regime, support their policies, support abandoning Afghanistan, support mandating people, locking them down, trying to force them to put something in their body that could be harmful and poisonous and kill them. And I think that because they have tried to do all of those things and then some, the American people said, we've had enough. And I think one of the reasons why President Trump was able to win, of course, with the help of many others out there, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point Action, of course, you had Scott Pressler and Early Vote Action, and you had Pennsylvania Chase and Cliff Maloney, and so many activists all around this great nation that just said we're gonna watch everything, and we're gonna make sure that no one is able to do what they did in 2020. So again, when you have an illegitimate regime, a wannabe dictatorship, if you will, that thankfully is on its way out, that's the reason. People felt enough pain. They may not have loved Trump, they may not have liked his mean tweets from time to time, but they certainly liked his cheap gas. They certainly liked his low inflation, lower taxes, lower spending, lower rents, lower mortgage payments, lower interest rates. And so normalcy is where America wants to get back to. And that's why President Trump won overwhelmingly such a huge landslide and mandate.
That's facts. Okay. And
Excuse me.
number one, yeah, I can't get over Elon and Scotty Pressler and PA. That was cool to watch. I understand they were literally giving Amish people rides to the polls.
They were. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
And that's what it's going to take. I'm going to expound on this another time. I already do it in a lot of my podcasts, but Project 65 is all about that.
Oh, Project 65, for the folks that don't know, the 65 Project is an evil, absolutely sadistic group of left-leaning extremist lawyers that got their name based on the quote-unquote 65 lawsuits that the Trump administration was trying, or the Trump campaign was trying to file in 2020, that of course were not seen by judges on purpose. Why? Because judges don't like to be the arbiter of elections, even though what happened in the 2020 election was certainly outcome determinative. But they hid behind having no standing, Pennsylvania versus Texas, all of that we saw, and they wouldn't take the cases. One of the reasons why President Trump was able to win this election is because they learned the lesson that when you see an issue or a problem, the new RNC did this, they filed lawsuits before any votes were counted. You see, a judge will step in if they see something nefarious. If they see some type of fraudulent activity, a judge will step in before the votes are counted and they will fix it. And that's why the RNC and the Trump campaign filed over 120 lawsuits, including about 87 of them in the swing states. So every single time Jocelyn Benson tried to do something where, oh, don't worry about it, the signatures don't have to match the ballot, and the ballot doesn't have to be inside of an envelope, and all these other crazy things that they tried to get away with, that they did get away with in 2020. Now all of a sudden they were stopped because the judges understood that by getting involved now, there were no votes counted. And so that's the lesson truly that the Trump campaign learned and the RNC learned. And every time they tried to do something nefarious, they were shot down, which is one reason why we had more election integrity. Certainly not all. I mean, we can look at the last 4 or 5 House seats in California as proof that there was theft there. We could look at the Senate seats clearly in Arizona, in Wisconsin, in Michigan. They tried to steal Pennsylvania even at the end, of course. And so, these are the types of things that need to get cleaned up. I love Doge. I think it's great to cut government, but I'd rather see an executive order on day one creating the Department of Election Integrity. And I want to see them fill it with forensic auditors that can start with the House races in California, then go to the Senate races that I mentioned, and then after that, go to the 2022 midterms, find out what happened with Arizona and Pennsylvania and everything else. Because let's face it, Fetterman may have had a couple of strokes and came out of it a conservative, but he didn't win that race. Dr. Oz won that race, and he's a rhino too. But at least we have to get to the bottom of some of the things that happened, of course, in Michigan with the candidate in Michigan against Gretchen Hitler, as I like to call her. And so there's a lot of things we got to get into. And then first and foremost, or lastly, I should say, it would be the 2020 election. If we can get in there, dig into there, find out what happened to those 14 million votes that all of a sudden didn't show up in 2024, nullify the 2020 election, and therefore null and void that presidency. I think that's where our focus ought to be.
The possibilities are endless. And I would say paper ballots. I know the government can't dictate it, but they can sure as hell put their finger on the scale for paper ballots. You do not have an election if your election is all electronic. Electronics can, I don't care what anybody says, electronics can be manipulated. There's always a back door. They are all hackable. And I've watched a man use the Dominion thing as child's play. The interviewer said, "Can you actually hack into it?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And he starts typing. And she goes, "Go ahead and show me." He says, "Go ahead, I'm in. What do you want to know?"
That's what I talk about in Preserving Liberty as well. And one of the things that I talk about in particular, and folks, you can go to Amazon right now and pick up a copy of Preserving Liberty, Bold and Brave Solutions to Save America and Create Permanent Freedom. But one of the things that I talk about is that tyranny is sold as convenience. Just hit this button, and you can put your vote in. You don't have to worry about filling out those circles on the piece of paper. Nah, that's old school. Hit these buttons right here. What's that? Are they plugged into the internet? No, of course not.
Of course not.
And so that's what they do. Tyranny is sold as convenience, and you have to remember that. Well, you're right. We have to go back to smaller precincts. We have to go back to one day for voting. And here's where I break from conservatives, and believe me, I'm a conservative. I don't like a quote-unquote election holiday either. A lot of people that I know are pushing that we should have an election day where everyone's off. Absolutely not. Because all you're going to do is you're going to get the worst of society figuring out how to get out and vote on that one day. And so I look at it this way. It's worked for 75 plus years, however long it's been, where you can go early in the morning before work. You can go on your lunch break, which, by the way, is federally mandated for 3 hours, and employers cannot fire employees for voting on election day. And of course, you have time after work because the polls close usually at 8 o'clock. So my thought is you have all day to go out there and vote. And quite frankly, if you can't find the time, then it probably wasn't as important to you. But the last thing we need is a election day holiday. In my opinion.
Yeah, I've been saying, I didn't say that's an interesting take on the holiday. But I've been talking about election day. Ron and I railed about it for a year prior to the election. Um, Absentee ballots for military and expats or severely disabled only. No mail-in ballot because
Right.
I just wanna. That's not a justification for mail-in ballot. And
Right.
Jimmy Carter's commission said the easiest way to slouch toward corruption is mass mail-in, never do it. That was his advice.
Absolutely. And that is something. And look, let me say this. It there's nothing in the Constitution that says any American has the right to vote dot 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 by mail. Okay? It
Right,
doesn't exist. So this is something new. This is something that they brought in recently. They used the COVID lockdowns and all
right.
that. That's what they
COVID is
did in
covered.
Wisconsin,
Right.
right? In Wisconsin, they went to a left-leaning judge and they said, being that there's a quote-unquote lockdown, that means that everybody is an indefinitely confined individual. And so, therefore, we want you, Mr. and Mrs. Judge, whoever you might be, to sign off on that to say that everybody is now a quote unquote indefinitely confined voter. Therefore, we can have no fault mail in ballots. And that is exactly how Wisconsin, which usually has pretty, strict guidelines when it comes to mail-in ballots and things like that. They blew that wide open, and that's one of the ways that Wisconsin was stolen. But not just Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, all of these states. That's what they did. They used the lockdown and COVID. Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Rahm Emanuel once famously said.
That's right.
Well, there it was. They created this crisis, this fake pandemic, and they used it to stop his rallies first and foremost. And then after that, they used it to stop him and to stop the entire election so that it could go to a completely unfounded, unway to even govern it or even oversee the election. They basically destroyed the state's ability to oversee the elections by doing this, by stepping in over the states, the secretaries of states, things like that, attorney generals making rules that didn't exist. And so anyone that thinks that the 2020 election wasn't stolen, I always have one question for them. What happened to the 14 million votes that so-called 81 million Joe got? Do you think Kamala just completely
Yeah,
lost all
the
those
spike
votes?
stands alone. That spike
Right.
stands all by itself on a graph.
Excuse me.
And when you have a spike like that and you don't have an explanation, then it's bullshit. And
Exactly. That's absolutely
nobody
true.
can say why 15 million. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you recall, a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks tops before that election, every talking head, even the lefties, were saying Democratic morale is in the toilet. This election just we got to piss it away and look at the next one. And
That's
then
how I lost.
just a
That's
few
how
days
I was
before, they
censored.
started saying, "Oh no, there's more momentum." Based on what? They had no new events, no new data. Somebody nodded and said, "You can say it now. It's in the bag." Somebody did that.
The election was stolen in May of 2020. Okay, right around the height of the George Fentanyl Floyd riots. That's when they all met in New York and also in Washington, D.C. And Norm Eisen and his color revolution and the Republicans. Remember, this never could have happened just by the Democrats only. Republicans in Washington were involved in stopping Trump as well. And I talk about it in the book as well. But in May, that's when they all met and they got together on Zoom calls and conference calls and things like that. And they put everything in place in May of 2020. And right around that time, everybody was completely obsessed with what was going on with the riots and everything else, and George Floyd. And so it was a diversion. It was a perfect diversion for them to do and implement what they did. And
Absolutely.
honestly, 2 weeks before the election is where my career, as the trajectory of my career was doing so well, I was on Amazon Prime. I had my own Roku television show, millions upon millions of voters. And 2 weeks before the election, I was interviewing Russell Ramsland from Allied Security out of Texas. And he was showing us on live television on CNN in the Andy Beshear, Matt Bevin Kentucky governor's race. They were literally taking in a split second 5,000 or more votes away from Matt Bevin and giving them to Andy Brashear in a
I vaguely
split
remember
second
this. Yeah.
on live television. So after that video went out, I was warning people that in 2 weeks, they're going to do this again. This is in the bag. This is what they're doing. This is how they're baked in. That video had 900,000 views on it in less than 36 hours. From there, I lost both of my YouTube channels immediately.
Yep.
And then from there, I got into it with Ilhan Omar, or Ilhan Noor Saeed Elmi, her real name, exposed who she was, where she came from. And from that point, it was pretty much the end. I was ghosted, went from millions upon millions of views to practically nothing in a 48-hour period. And that's another reason why I wrote my book, because I am so censored. This is an opportunity for me to get my voice out there and beat the censorship barriers.
Yeah, you can't cancel a book.
Right.
But
Exactly. Well,
but you
you'd
did
hope
you
not.
did get back on your feet. I was going to ask you that offline, but it's interesting. How did you start the JBU show? And who hosts it?
Well, I host it, obviously, but
No,
you mean
I
this?
mean electronically. Where?
Oh yeah, no. I can't divulge any of that. I've got, put it this way, I have more security on my website than the entire infrastructure of the country of Norway. Okay. I have military grade security on the website for a reason, because the things that I've exposed, the people I've exposed, the organizations I've exposed, how I go after China. I have an entire section called the China Syndrome in
Mhm.
this book, in which I go through all of China, from
I
Belt
have
and
I
Road
haven't gotten there
initiatives,
yet. Don't give too much away.
all of it. Yeah. And so, put it this way, I'll give you an idea. In order for me to speak freely in the quote unquote free United States of America, I have to rely on a security team in another country 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Let that sink in.
God, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous reality.
It
So
is.
I guess I won't ask you where it goes out from.
Well, no, I
I was
mean,
just wondering if it was like
jbushow.com
WordPress
is the
or,
website. Yeah, jbushow.com is the website.
right.
Anybody can go and check it out. You can become a subscriber there, starting around $5, $10 a month, whatever you want to do. That's how I make my living, of course. And I'm very censored. I don't have the ability to take a show and then throw it all over the place on social media everywhere. It's
Yeah.
starting to come back, because I've been living for 4 years in political purgatory, if you will. But now with the new administration coming in, I'm starting to branch out a little bit,
Yeah.
moving on to X, trying to grow X, Rumble, and some of the others out there. So
Yeah,
you
I
can
was just
find
about
some
to
of
ask
me.
you about Rumble. You too can be a pooper. In 2018, I was an author with a WordPress site. My mission was to create better politicians by informing and inspiring the best of our voters. I succeeded one voter at a time, but there are more than 200 million of you out there. So I started the P4B, then the Jordan Corey Show, and ultimately the Free Zone Communique to widen my reach. Now we hope to rekindle your sacred, your important archival knowledge, and channel it toward building a healthier, more productive republic. You can add your voice in the comment section. Our words will echo, but how loudly and for how long depends on you. The more you support us, the louder the echo. The more you share, the more ears the echo will reach. We're working to improve our delivery and expand our reach. Subscriptions are still 100% free. Help us grow numerically and technically and remain a free site. You can donate directly or support our affiliate sponsors. There are buttons below the media line of this episode. Click on those for, I don't know, Trump gear, Free Zone gear, P4B gear, or just shop Poe River. I've reduced all the clothing, the t-shirts, the jackets, the hats to my cost plus shipping charged by Etsy. I feature some of the items, including the 65 hoodie below the media line. That's the one you see right here. The 65 hoodie is cool. You will be wearing the solution to regaining our republic right on your back. So share every post and episode. Subscribe or follow on Substack and Rumble. Become a political party pooper. You get it? Political party pooper. Pretty good. It's great, right? Yeah, I mentioned Titer's 8 steps earlier. And
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
I put us,
Stages of democracy.
yeah, the 8 steps to democracy. For those who don't know, I don't have it in front of me.
From bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from great courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, and from dependence back into bondage.
Okay. I'm hoping you can make me feel better, but I'm not naive. I put us squarely on 7 and teetering.
Yeah, I would say you're absolutely correct in your assessment. I think we're right there. We are close to bondage. We are certainly at an apathetic stage, without a doubt. But are we going to go into slavery and bondage? Well, God has given us a reprieve, hopefully for at least the next 4 years, if not longer. And if President Trump can get through the inauguration, which again, we can talk about, I'm very worried about that. But assuming he gets through that, and I don't mean not being sworn in, I mean something obviously a lot worse.
Right.
But assuming he gets through that, then I think we have an opportunity to have a lot more prosperity, freedom, liberty, less censorship, and truly enter into this new golden age to save America.
Well, based on that, and I want to circle back, the next 4 years can be great, but we can't get the big ticket stuff without a veto-proof majority in the Senate, or so many Democrats cowed that it's the same thing as a veto-proof majority. And to go back to what we were talking about earlier, I'm going to have to change the name of my project, because when I said Project 65, I was talking about mine.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the 65 Project.
And when you explained it, I remembered it.
Law group.
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna have to keep it the 65.
They go after lawyers, like for instance, lawyers that represented Carrie Lake in her lawsuits.
Right.
They go after President Trump's lawyers. You know, they try to get them disbarred.
And Carrie Lake, I would kill to have her on.
I've
interviewed her twice. Carrie Lake. But my idea of 65 is veto-proof majority plus a few to keep those unreliable self-promoters, they can't ruin it. And of course, every time I say it, achieving that majority, people say it's impossible. Well, of course it isn't. It's a numerical goal that you set. And my explanation of it is kind of the political mechanics of achieving the things that you and I already clearly believe in. And I think if we could get there or even close by the midterms, we infinitely enhance the work that Trump and Vance and real conservatives can actually accomplish. So that's the idea behind the 65 concept. I am no longer going to call it Project 65.
Well,
I'm going to stay away from that one.
First thing I would say is Democrats can't stop President Trump, okay? It can't happen. They don't have the numbers to do it. So the only people that can stop President Trump are the Republicans, sadly. And I have been talking about the fact that one of the greatest things that Elon Musk can do and should do and must do is become the enforcer for President Trump. His consigliere, okay, let's call it that, all right? And he needs to take these Republican senators and Republican members of the House. He needs to put them in a closed door meeting, confiscate their phones, put them outside the room, kick out the media, kick out everybody, and he needs to basically tell them all, look, everybody in this room, you are going to do exactly what we say. President Trump has a mandate to deliver to the American people, and we are not going to have even one no vote from any of you. You are going to not only nominate and approve his cabinet members, but more importantly, when we take over, you are going to be a solid yes vote on every single piece of legislation. And if you're not, your careers in Washington will end, because I have the money, the clout, and the power to put you all out. Are we clear? And then make them sign a pledge saying, I will go along with President Trump's complete 2025 agenda, because let's face it, that's what it is, thank God.
Yeah.
That's what he ought to do.
People will scream, it's a rubber stamp.
Don't
Well,
care.
okay.
Don't
Okay.
care what the left says. Don't care what the media prostitutes say.
We got
Don't matter.
3,000 out of 3,400 counties in this country. You know,
There's 3,142 counties or county equivalents in the United States of America. Yes.
yeah. If all those districts counted the same, the Democrats would have gotten like 3% of the vote. To break it
Well,
down.
I actually talk about in Preserving Liberty, the left wants to get rid of the Electoral College, although they haven't been saying much about it now because it worked, right? But because he won the popular vote too, right? Otherwise, you'd be hearing all about it. But they want to get rid of the Electoral College so that they can run up the coasts and basically keep Republicans from ever winning elections again.
Right.
But it's interesting that you brought up the counties, because in Balancing the Electorate, chapter 3, I believe it is, I talk about how there's 3,142 counties or county equivalents in the United States of America. 50% of the entire population lives in only 145 of those counties.
Right.
So what does that mean? That means if you live in one of those 2,998 other counties, you have virtually no say on who your elected officials are. So how can we sit here with a straight face and call ourselves a representative government of, for, and by the people if 95% of those people literally have no say in who their elected officials are?
Correct.
So what I talk about in the book is, let's not scrap the Electoral College, but let's modify it. Let's turn it into 50 Nebraskas or 50 Maines. And what I mean by that is, let's apportion electoral votes based on the size of the counties rather than the full makeup of the state. And I came up with a formula on how that would work in the book. And if that was ever implemented, you would never probably see a Democrat win an election again. Because what you're doing is you're dispersing the power structure away from the big blue urban epicenters, and you're giving it back as a constitutional representative government to its rightful owners, we the people, in the areas that are less populated. Now they all of a sudden would have a say in exactly how elections were run. And that's what I talk about in Preserving Liberty.
No, I agree with everything you just said. I will have to read the formula. Again, I'm only like partway into the book by now. But I did try to browse ahead a little bit in preparation. As far as electoral goes, that is usually the whine of the people on the losing end. I remember when, well before the election, when they were making calculations, the path to victory, and people were saying Trump might get popular, but Hillary's going to kill him on the electoral. Immediately, I had conservative friends saying, "Get rid of the Electoral College." No, no, it's one of the two powers we have left. Out of all the powers enumerated for the states, reserved for the states, this is one or two that we have left.
The reality of the 2016 election was that Hillary Clinton was never in front, ever, not in any state. She was losing by between 12 and 15 points in every single state. But the media, the prostitutes in the media, would never divulge that information. So what they would do is they would take these little polls, right? 312 people, Democrat plus 6, Democrat plus 7. They would take these little tiny polls and they would manipulate them, manipulate the people, and they'd say, look, he's losing Wisconsin by 11 points to Hillary Clinton, trying to depress turnout for
Right.
President Trump. That's what it was. It was called suppression polls. But here's the difference. There was a couple of organizations back then, if you remember, including one that did an online poll where all it was one question: who are you going to vote for? And there was over 100,000 people in the poll, and it was like 75% Trump, 25% Hillary. So when I saw that poll, I did a video immediately saying all the polls are wrong. He's going to win, and he's going to outperform the polls you watch. And of course, I was correct.
Yeah, I have a friend, Joanne Bailey. I met her for an interview recently. I grew up with her family. She lives in Texas now, and she's a gambler, not a hardcore gambler. She bets $5 here, $5 there. She likes playing with the numbers. And on election night, Ron and I were watching the returns. We were doing a live feed, and we're like, "Wow, this is close. What if he doesn't take North Carolina?" And Joanne comes on and she says, "Relax, relax." So what are you talking about? She goes, "We're going to clean up tonight." And of course, we're trying to get our heads around that. The people on TV are going, "All right, there's no way Trump's going to pick up enough states." Joanne's saying, "Just relax. It's all in there." And it turns out she calls them better than anybody. She's not a professional poll taker. She's not, she is political, but she's not a prognosticator. And she did so well on her predictions, and she always does, as it turns out, because she reads the numbers the way a bookie reads the numbers. No emotion, you know, just
Right,
lay
right.
it all out. And she's right like 99% of the time.
And I think a lot of it has to do with when you're watching polls and when you're watching returns coming in that night. When you see the Democrat, let's say, up big, but there's only 12% of the vote in, you can't panic because there's a lot more vote out there. And I
Way more
think
vote.
once you hit that 65% mark, and President Trump was winning by 3, 4 points, sometimes 5 points in a lot of these states, he would have had to have lost the remaining votes in order to lose. What I was worried about on election night was what I'm always worried about, and that is the big urban epicenters that never report the vote on time. In other words, I give you an example, and I talk about it in the book. Garland Favorito from Voter GA, good buddy of mine. I'll never forget the runoff election between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock. And I'm watching it, and Herschel Walker is just killing him all night. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 point leads, about 35, 40% of the vote in. He's still winning by 6.5, 7 points, right? Just killing it. Somewhere around 70, 75%, it's getting closer and closer. And so I called Garland and I said, Garland, is he going to pull this out? Herschel Walker. And he goes, I don't think so. And I said, why? And he goes, because Fulton County is sandbagging. And one thing I talk about in the book is we need to get rid of sandbagging. In other words, everybody has to report all at the same time. So what Georgia did in that instance is all the red counties reported first. And that's why Herschel Walker was just killing it. But Fulton County was lagging behind. What were they doing? Well, they were calculating. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. The red counties, we know how many votes that they have. So now we're going to basically manufacture the remaining votes, and then we're going to report that it was a real close race, but Warnock just barely won it. And that's what they did. That's how they stole the Georgia Senate race.
Yeah, and
And so we've got to stop that.
Warnock to me is one of the most disgusting political stereotypes. Supposedly a man of God.
Right.
Stoked his congregation for so much money. He lives so large. Half his congregation lives below the poverty line or more. And yeah, I did watch that election unfold, and I heard a lot of people saying exactly what you're saying. going back to our talk about paper ballots and what you said about reporting on time, I don't care how big your district is or how many votes you have to cover. If you have paper ballots and you can have scanners, nothing wrong with having a scanner. Shove the paper ballot through the scanner, it's counted.
Just
The
make sure
paper
the
gets set
paper's the right
aside.
size, right?
Pardon me?
I said just make sure the paper's the right size, a la
Right.
Arizona 2022.
Right. So it goes through. You need two people on either side watching for double scanning because that occurred several times in 2020 and 2022. But at 8 o'clock on the East Coast, the show's over.
Right.
They're already scanned, they're already counted. You hit a button and boom, your numbers go in. And you've got the receipts in a box locked up to prove it. That's it. You can't say,
Yeah,
oh,
that and of course we need hologram ballots that when you tilt them a certain way in the light, there's a watermark on them.
right, right.
That's
Fraud
what you
proof. Yeah.
have to have because
Mhm.
if you don't, then you can't differentiate between the fake ballots. I mean, they're getting so good. If you saw the movie, um, what was it called with Dinesh D'Souza, Vindicating Trump, who I interviewed
I
Dinesh
haven't seen it yet.
D'Souza.
I
It's a
saw
great
some of the
movie.
earlier ones. Yeah.
There's a scene in it where they talk about how they can take the ballots, they can go to a print shop, and they can duplicate the ballots exactly the way they're supposed to look. So, what would differentiate that from the real ones? A watermark. We need to mandate watermarks on every single ballot that are obviously real ballots. And so, when it does go through that machine, it'll pick it up. That's not, it doesn't have a watermark. It can't be counted. And we
You
got to
probably,
get rid of early voting. We should not have a voting season or a month or a voting 2 months or a voting 3 months. We
yeah.
need one day and that's it. If we're going to do absentee ballots, then it would only be for the military. They would have to be outside the country, not just any military member can vote that way. You have to be stationed outside the country, number one. And number two, if you are indefinitely infirmed, if you're paraplegic, if you're in a wheelchair, whatever that may be, I understand that, but you would have to be able to show that and prove that. Otherwise, you would have to vote on election day as
In
well.
person
We've got to button up the system 100%.
and do away entirely today with ballot dumpsters. These collection points.
Absolutely.
They're
I talk
they're
about that in the book
they've
too.
been horse shit since day one. They're totally worthless. But I mean, you're probably more familiar with this than I am in terms of the specifics. What kind of rules can the federal government establish that the state governments have to follow? Because the Constitution gives the states pretty much free reign on how to run an election. But what
It's
can the
supposed to,
federal
yes.
government say that will require certain things of the state governments?
Well, I guess the way to answer that question would be what can the Trump administration do immediately at the federal level that would secure our elections in the future? And the first thing that we can do is we could pass the rule, I think it was the SAVE, I can't remember what it was called initially, where they mandate every single state has voter ID. Okay. That's number one. If we do that, we take care of at least, I would say, 40 to 50% of the problem right off the bat, just with that one thing alone. Why? Because every single state, other than one, I think New Hampshire, that quote unquote heals up headboard Harris, as I call her on my show, one, were states that did not require voter ID. Everywhere it was required, Trump won. Gee, I wonder why. So
Hmm.
that would be number one. Number two, included in that bill would be that no one that is not an American citizen can vote in any of our elections at any level, whether it's state, local, or federal. And if we eliminate those two things, we are on the path to election integrity. Of course, we would have a lot more things that we would need to do at that point, But I think if we were able to get those passed before the 2026 midterms, we would be in very good shape for those midterm elections and future elections after that.
Yeah, I find it nothing short of entertaining when people insist that illegals didn't vote.
Yeah,
Of course
clearly they
they did. Of course they did. And here's how the scam works. Places like DC, they already have you can vote in local elections as an illegal.
That's correct. I put that in the book. Yeah.
But it's almost academic because they do issue them IDs and they're not allowed to ask their immigration status when they get the ID.
Exactly.
Nor is the person handing out ballots. They're sitting at a table, look at your name, look at an address. It might even be a valid address of this illegal person. Look at the ID. They're not allowed to say, are you here illegally?
Right.
They don't have time to litigate it. Here's your ID.
Yeah. Now in California, it's even worse. I mean, Gruesome Newsom right now is watching his state burn down to the ground intentionally. But they passed a law where you're not even allowed to have a voter ID, which is unconstitutional. And by the way, Pam Bondi and the Trump administration is going to challenge that, and the Supreme Court is going to overturn it. You can mark my words on that. So that rule it's going to be bye-bye very, very, very soon. But the fact that he did that, it goes to show you they have no intention of ever running clean elections in the state of California. I mean, it's an admission of guilt, as far as I'm concerned.
You just reminded me of two things. One, I want to go back to when I said veto proof. I also meant to say filibuster proof when I talked about our majorities, because there are still certain things that we can't do other than reconciliation, which is bullshit. That reconciliation was never meant to pass major bills, but that's what they do it on now. But you want a clean, veto-proof, filibuster-proof majority so you can put clean shit through with as few or no earmarks as possible. But the other thing was, and this is evidenced by Gavin Newsom, this is evidenced by the shit show you saw yesterday on Hegseth. The Democrats did this phony self-examination after the election. What have we done wrong? How can we change? They're not going to change anything. They're going to triple down on all the lunacy and say this is the new Democratic Party. That's why we have to be strong. That's why we have to be more engaged. And I know people are thinking, man, we just had an election. Yeah, okay. But we need to think about this. The midterms will mean a lot. Anything Trump can't do by executive order and undoing old executive orders is going to have to be done in the House and Senate.
Correct. And that's why, President Trump said he's going to drop 100 executive orders on day one. Okay, well, that's wonderful. That's great. But that's governing artificially in my estimation. I like the fact that he can get things done through the executive order, but the executive order was never meant to use as a governing tool. It was for, naming post office, naming, forest areas, whatever, fire departments, just kind of silly things like that. It was never supposed to be for immigration, for spending, for this, for that. But sadly, because of the gridlock in Washington and, the filibustering and all the other things that happen, it's almost impossible to pass legislation these days. And that's sadly a reality that we find ourselves in. So I say we fix it through executive action, but then what we do is we fortify it through legislation. Fortify these gains that we will have gotten from the executive action, fortify them into legislation. If we don't do that, then it's artificial, then it's temporary, and if somebody else comes in, they can undo it all. And that's what happened in the past, and Trump has done it to Biden, Biden's done it to Trump, and it's like a back and forth.
Right.
If we're going to have sustainable change, then that change has to come from legislation.
Okay. Josh, I'll tell you, there's a million more things I want to get to with you. If you'd ever like to have me on, I'm not too proud to say that's a great idea. Other than that, we'll try to get you back as soon as you're available again, because I like the direction of this conversation. So thanks for joining us. This was a great conversation. It's been great having you on, and good luck with the book.
Yep, thank you. And folks, you can go to Amazon. This book is only 150 pages. It's not a very long book, but it's a very powerful book. This is the type of book you want to read with a yellow highlighter in your hand. There are numerous audible gasps at the information that you will find.
Testify to that right off the bat. I've got the yellow marker out.
And the other thing I was going to say is Congressman Paul Gosar, a good buddy of mine, did the foreword to it. There are 40 solutions in this book. I don't just complain about the problems. I show you solutions. There are 10 legislative ideas that I have came up with myself that he can introduce in the next Congress. It's also been endorsed by the great Alan Dershowitz for its constitutionality, and my good buddy Roger Stone as well. So please pick it up on Amazon, Preserving Liberty book, Bold and Brave Solutions to Save America and Create Permanent Freedom.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Matt, for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Congrats on the endorsements, and all the links will be below the video line. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
God bless.
Please tell a friend about the Free Zone Communique. We live and die with the share and subscribe buttons. Please use affiliate and sponsor buttons to support our work. Thank you very much for joining us today.